foolish antics of those Central Star nobles? Mechas are instruments of war, intended for slaying beasts. You think you can advocate for justice and transparency with them? With this ridiculous iron will tenet, my newly crafted syllabus is rendered obsolete. The principal's emphasis on scientific and quality education is futile. He still had to resort to corporal punishment, forcibly extracting the misguided doctrine of the Iron Heart from the minds of his students. Lu Wenzhong's eyes widened in defiance. He believed the Iron Heart principle was undeniably correct. He opened his mouth to retort, but Yu Yong swiftly retaliated with a kick, barking, "Hold your tongue. 10 kilometers, run it. If you dare speak again, I'll add another 10. Terrified, Lu Wenzhong quickly clenched his fists and sprinted away. Yu Yong turned his gaze, scanning from left to right. Upon catching Yu Yong's eye, Shen Zhaoyun immediately lowered her head in silence. The teacher resembled a powder keg, ready to explode at any moment, and she certainly did not wish to be reprimanded into running 10 kilometers. However, Shen Zhaoyun was overly cautious. Yu Yong's attention had already shifted to another student. Initially, he had hoped to alter his typically brusque demeanor for this first encounter with the students, especially after receiving counsel from the principal to temper his harsh teaching methods. Thus, he had intended to refrain from physical intervention today. Yet, now it seemed that such restraint was no longer an option. He focused on the student who had been most vocal earlier, kicking up a long spear and pointing it at him. "You come here. Pick up that spear from the ground. I shall teach you what the true Iron Heart principle entails." The student, wearing a pained expression, approached hesitantly, grasping the spear tightly while keeping a wary eye on Yu Yong. Without further ado, Yu Yong struck, the spear landing squarely on the student's leg. Shen Zhaoyun shuddered. Was this not her own technique from earlier? This teacher had shamelessly replicated her methods to punish that student. However, the student proved more astute, managing to evade by a meter. Yu Yong nodded, acknowledging the instinct to flee. Yet, his movements quickened, and soon the student found himself kneeling on the ground, unable to rise. Despite his efforts to stand, the teacher's spear repeatedly struck him in uncomfortable places, rendering him powerless. This was intolerable. Shen Zhaoyun could hardly bear to watch. Yu Yong had indeed mirrored her every action, targeting the same areas he had previously attacked Lu Wenzhong. The onlooking students were still naive, lacking the perceptiveness to understand. They believed her success against Lu Wenzhong was merely due to a surprise attack. In truth, her strikes were meticulously calculated, as she possessed a profound understanding of human anatomy and force application, enabling her to incapacitate Lu Wenzhong entirely. At this moment, some students began to discern the similarities. They noted how the teacher's strikes on Wang Fan mirrored Shen Zhaoyun's earlier assault on Lu Wenzhong. Look, Wang Fan is just as unable to rise as Lu Wenzhong was. It became clear that Wang Fan was the unfortunate student currently receiving the brunt of the punishment. Indeed, the frequency of the teacher's strikes is just as intense as Shen Zhaoyun's, exclaimed one student in awe. Yu Yong glanced at the observing students before declaring, "If you can't run, then you must roll." Upon hearing this, Wang Fan, disregarding his dignity, immediately began to roll forward like a worm, stirring up clouds of dust in the process. Yu Yong continued to strike several more times until the student was solely focused on escaping, completely oblivious to everything else, before finally halting his actions. "Do you understand? What I just conveyed is the creed of the Iron Heart. You must remember, the first tenet I imparted. If you cannot withstand, then flee. If you cannot run, then roll. Should anyone dare utter the words of fairness and justice again, I shall deliver a blow." Yu Yong declared proudly, brandishing his long spear. Coughing, Shen Zhaoyun choked slightly. Surely, this teacher's pedagogical methods were inherited from 3 centuries past. Upon hearing her voice, Yu Yong cast a meaningful glance in her direction. This student is quite remarkable, he mused. He had just noted her actions and realized that her technique indeed held a certain cunning. Yet what of it? She is still one of his students. With a dismissive grunt, he announced, 5 kilometers. Shen Zhaoyun immediately lowered her head. Must I also run 5 kilometers for a mere cough? That is utterly tyrannical. But Yu Yong merely pointed to Wang Fan, who was covered in dirt and in disarray after rolling about. "Your 5 kilometers begin now. You shall accompany Lu Wenzhong on his run. Your reflexes were far too sluggish. I had to repeat myself for you to evade." Sighing, Wang Fan brushed the dust from his face. Unlike Lu Wenzhong, he understood the situation and refrained from arguing, promptly turning to sprint towards the track. His pivot and dash were as if a ghost were pursuing him. Yu Yong then proceeded to call out more students, ensuring that the remaining class time was filled with the rigors of his merciless teaching methods. By the end of the lesson, apart from Shen Zhaoyun, everyone else had either faced several stinging strikes or was penalized with a 5 or 10 kilometer run. Upon returning from their exertions, the students were not granted respite. They were required to stand at attention. Exhausted and covered in dirt, they lamented their plight. As the class concluded and Yu Yong departed, half of the students collapsed onto the ground. One of them complained, "Woe is me, Lu Wenzhong. Why did you mention the creed of the Iron Heart to the teacher?" "The creed of the Iron Heart is indeed correct," Lu Wenzhong retorted defiantly, even as his legs wobbled. He stood firm. "For the creed also states that one must not show weakness, nor bend, but remain resolute and unyielding." A fellow student could not help but roll his eyes, believing that Shen Zhaoyun had been too lenient. Another student, whose back and behind ached painfully, lay on the ground moaning, "My back hurts, my behind hurts. I don't understand how the teacher struck me. When he did, I could barely stand, and ultimately, I had no choice but to roll on the ground." Others chimed in, "You are all foolish. When the teacher strikes, you should immediately roll to avoid further punishment. The faster you roll, the less you will have to run. I received 2 strikes and rolled right away, so I only had to run a kilometer." Observing her classmates' miserable state, Shen Zhaoyun could not suppress a shake of her head. She kindly warned, "In 8 minutes, we have another class with Yan Ziguan. He is not an easy teacher to deal with. I hope my dear classmates can endure today. Quickly, we must not miss Yin Ziguan's class. Someone exclaimed, staggering to their feet. Another shouted, drat, I forgot to borrow the medical pod from Yu Yong. He has one, and my behind is in agony. How can I attend class? I suppose we will have to stand and endure the lecture. Who possesses an aircraft to offer me a ride? I find myself unable to move. Fellow classmates, lend me your support. I shall assist you in return. As I pitifully make my way outside, Shen Xiaoyun, with her hands tucked into her pockets, sauntered effortlessly through the throng. Alas, she was devoid of any means of swift transportation and thus had to hasten her pace. Yet, her immaculate appearance and leisurely demeanor evoked a complex mix of emotions among the onlookers. Despite her physical limitations, this lesson was undeniably her most enjoyable. Not only was she not penalized for arriving late, but the instructor also refrained from uttering a single reprimand. Chapter 31. A reunion with Yin Ziguan A14 classroom. The forthcoming lecture was once again on the history of mecha development, presented by Yin Ziguan. This time, Shen Xiaoyan made sure not to arrive late. She took her usual seat, and the unfortunate Xia Xingyu, who was retaking the course, comfortably settled beside her. Observing the disheveled state of the underclassmen in the classroom, Xia Xingyu leaned closer to Shen Xiaoyan and inquired, did you have a class just now? Indeed. We just finished Professor Yu Yang's weapons training class. Shen Xiaoyan gently raised a book to shield her face from Xia Xingyu's eager gaze. After 2 months of classes, she had discerned that this sophomore sister was inexplicably exuberant, often expressing her emotions through exaggerated gestures. As anticipated, Xia Xingyu skillfully embraced both Shen Xiaoyan and her book, exclaiming dramatically, ah, Yu Yang's class, no wonder. He is a dreadful teacher, but in terms of incompetence, the worst of them all is Yin Ziguan. Shen Xiaoyan's expression shifted as she caught sight of a familiar face outside the glass window. Her countenance changed, and she quickly shook her head at Xia Xingyu, signaling her to cease speaking and look outside. Unfortunately, Xia Xingyu did not comprehend and continued her animated gestures, proclaiming, Yin Ziguan ranks first. Thus Yu Yong must come in second. Last time, I was even kicked to a limp by Yu Yong, but at least he manages both discipline and evaluation. Yin Ziguan, however, is excessive. His lectures are so poorly delivered that I find myself drowsy and restless. Consequently, I performed poorly on my exams, which resulted in countless retakes, ultimately leading me to attend classes alongside you underclassmen. Shen Xiaoyan blinked rapidly, her eyes nearly twitching, while Yin Ziguan, seated nearby, wore a stern expression, glaring intently at Xia Xingyu. Xia Xingyu seized Shen Xiaoyan's book and tossed it onto the desk, nodding vigorously as she concluded, thus, I assert that the most wretched teacher is indeed Yin Ziguan. Alas, Shen Xiaoyan withdrew her hand, helplessly covering her face. There was no saving them. As expected, Yin Ziguan's thunderous voice echoed through the room. Xia Xingyu. Xia Xingyu froze in place, then slowly turned her head to gaze out the window, where she observed Yin Ziguan's furious silhouette disappearing from view. She then lamented, it's over. I shall never pass this course. Even if you answer every question correctly during the exam, he'll still fail you. Shen Xiaoyan's words deepened the gloom on Xia Xingyu's face. If she could answer correctly, would she need to retake the course? Just as Yin Ziguan, who had vanished from the window, now stood at the podium. He entered with a stern visage, immediately noticing the disarray and lackadaisical demeanor of the students. The words of Xia Xingyu echoed in my mind once more, as she expressed her disdain for the most inept teacher, Yin Ziguan, who ranked first in delivering uninspired lectures that rendered me drowsy and restless. His visage darkened as he banged the table, admonishing us, look at your demeanor. What do you resemble? Do you truly despise attending my class this much? Each of you sits there in complete disarray, unwilling and disinterested. At that moment, Xia Xingyu shielded her eyes with her hand, only to withdraw it in puzzlement upon hearing Yin Ziguan's remarks. He is not coming after me? Shen Xiaoyan couldn't suppress a smirk. Casting a sympathetic glance at her classmates on the right, they had just endured a painful reprimand from teacher Yu Yong, their posteriors sore, having just run 5 kilometers. They were indeed a picture of disarray, both physically and mentally. In her case, there would have been no need to even reach the classroom. She might have fainted halfway there. Upon hearing Yin Ziguan's words, the students below grinned and sat up straight. Xia Xingyu, sensing the storm had passed, turned to observe the younger students in the classroom, exclaiming, no wonder Yin Ziguan isn't scolding me. Your classmates are just too weak. After attending teacher Yu's class, each of you appears as though your souls have departed. However, Xiaoyan, you seem completely unfazed. Shen Xiaoyan sighed. They've been punished to run, but I have not. And with you speaking, the teacher's gaze is drawn over here. Shen Xiaoyan was perplexed. Why did this senior always exude an air of fearless nonchalance? Xia Xingyu, stand up. Yin Ziguan commanded, his chest heaving with exertion. Upon entering the room, he had resolved not to engage in disputes with the students. He deliberately averted his gaze from the desk in the far right of the front row, wondering why some individuals exhibited such a lack of awareness. Here, Xia Xingyu stood rigidly, her legs straightened. Yin Ziguan scrutinized her for several moments before stating, in the last class, I discussed the history of the discovery of mecha materials. I ask you, do you recall how many types of materials suitable for manufacturing sensors are distributed in the fringe star systems? Name 2 sources of these materials. As soon as Yin Ziguan's voice fell, the students below frantically flipped through their books. Here it came, yet another impromptu quiz from Yin Ziguan, characterized by his penchant for obscure and seemingly trivial knowledge. Shen Xiaoyan mentally processed the information while maintaining her previous posture. There are 5 types in total. 3 mineral materials identified through elemental analysis, and the remaining 2 biological materials extracted from the bodies of alien beasts. Xiaoxing Yu's brows knitted together, her focus